Rob Arsenault, Annunciation of the Lord, Catholic Church. It's Wednesday night, it's 8 o'clock, and it's time for the Pastor's Chat. So this is the time I come on every week. I try to just be present. Really goes back to when we couldn't be together. So now that we can, and it just seems to have continued on. I got a really nice letter, actually, a little email. I just responded to it, actually. Some people who were just commenting how much they appreciate it. I don't know how many of you actually watch this. I don't know how many really gain from it, but there are some people who really appreciate it, and they love the fact they can chime in from anywhere. They were actually traveling overseas and chimed in and still got a little message from the parish and felt kind of edified by that. So thank you for doing that. Like, it really does help. There are times I kind of wondered, like, okay, we've come through COVID. I see more people than I have certainly in the last couple of years. Is it still necessary to continue to do this? I don't find it particularly hard. It takes 15, 20 minutes of my time and kind of the thought of the day. But maybe just chime in, if you do enjoy it, if it's beneficial to you. I know people don't watch it live as much, but maybe watch it later and do seem to benefit from it. So I do appreciate the feedback, because it helps me to know maybe what you want to talk about, but also that it's having some kind of an effect. So it's all good stuff. So what do we talk about tonight? Tonight I wanted to just, last week I talked something I picked up at the time I was doing the leadership conference in London. This is the Alpha conference that I've been talking about the last couple of weeks. And this notion of social media's effect on our kind of our moods, kind of on our sense of self, how we relate to each other, to the world. And the notion that social media sharpens our discontent, our resentment. Almost it puts an edge on things. And you certainly see this in politics, like very quickly. I just don't remember it being like this, where the world seems so polarized. It's always one side or the other, and your side's completely right and they're completely wrong, and there's just no give. And there's almost an animosity. And even within the church, I see that with ideas and concepts. It just seems like it's this sort of cancel thing where you write off an entire group of people very quickly based on some particular notion. And it's like, where do we get this? Like, we can't talk about things. We can't have some distinctions, or maybe there could be a little bit of nuance in the conversation. It's just say immediately it's either fantastic or horrible. And I just don't think life is that binary. I think that's just not the way things are. So that's one notion. So that was last week, really just talking about that concept and thinking a bit more about that. I wanted this models of church. I may have said this before. I've certainly said it in homilies. I don't know if I've ever said it online or in this context, so I want to share this. I'm thinking more about this too. And kind of with the leadership conference, one of the concepts that they had was a big front door, and that to allow more people to come in. Obviously, we want to be open to the world. This is a good thing. This is part of what the church is about. Go forth and make disciples. So to reach out to people and to share the gospel message. But if you have a big front door, you also have a kind of a big back door. What does that mean? Well, when I was a younger man in high school, sneaking out the back door was not a good thing. Well, it's not sneaking out the back door, it's sending people out. That what they experience within church is then really destined, designed, really intended for those who aren't in church. Like, to not, as the bishop's been saying, trying to bring more people into church, but in a sense, to bring Christ to people. And if people have an experience of Christ or experience of Christ in us, then it's more likely they would come to seek, okay, where did you find this? Where did you get this? How do I find more about this? Well, come and check it out. There's a certain logic to that. It's simplistic maybe, but I heard a line the other day I kind of liked, I'd rather be a bit naive than cynical. That the clear proclamation of the gospel could actually move a heart and could win a soul. Is it so corny, so simplistic that we wouldn't want that or desire it? So that's just a thought, right? So that to be a little gullible, that just the simple proclamation of Jesus Christ would be enough, or at least would be a start. And maybe we should just try simple before we get into complicated. But really what I want to talk about is models of church. And this I want to kind of almost a priest that I knew when I was in Halifax. He was talking about this one time and really kind of made a good go of it. And I'm scrambling for the name. It is. I will think of the name before the end of this, but it's a really great guy. Paul Morris, Father Paul Morris. Sorry, I apologize, Paul, if you ever catch this. Really interesting guy, Canadian lawyer, very bright. Just a friend and help when I was stationed there. And Paul and I got talking about this one time, Father Paul had this way of putting it. He said, there are different models of church, many models of church, but two in particular that he wanted to highlight was a monastic model. So this is, again, people could be both, monks and sometimes cloistered sisters that live this way, and they're very, very devout. They're talking people who spend 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 years. Like some of them live to be over 100 in a monastic kind of cloistered sort of setting. And so their style of liturgy is one that you remember got years and years and years. 6 hours a day you're spent in chapel praying and celebrating Mass and going through the office and doing holy hours. And it's very intense, good. It's part of, this whole 8 hours of prayer, 8 hours of sleep, 8 hours of work. This is the classic monastic kind of style, which really grew out of the desert experience, the Desert Fathers, the very early church. There weren't that many marginal desert places. Okay, we'll build our own desert. That's monastic life, a very controlled life that you don't have to think about the world very much. You just can focus totally on God. And it's a beautiful model for those who have the vocation. So that's one model of church, right? We can all kind of imagine that. Life in a monastery, pretty much your whole day, your whole life is pretty orderly. You eat, you sleep, you pray, you work. You eat, you sleep, you pray, you work. And it's just this very consistent model that you do. Okay, great. Contrasted with that is a different model, not better, worse, different model, and that's the cathedral model, or the parish model, one could say. But cathedral just makes it kind of easier in kind of an imagery in your mind. If you imagine a kind of a European center square, like most towns or cities would have, squares. They have open spaces, and particularly, in a capital town, a little bit bigger city, at the very heart of the city often is an open square, a city block that's left open for gathering. And in that city block, there would be the important kind of ministries, like in the sense there would be the mayor's office, there'd be the police station, there might be a fire station. These are core things that are important to the whole city, and they're very centralized, and everyone knows where they are. Okay. One of those things would be the parish church, or possibly the cathedral or basilica. And this church would be very central, and sometimes the center of the town, of the city. I think of the very famous Notre Dame that caught fire years ago, and I guess pretty close to getting reopened actually. But Notre Dame Basilica, the cathedral in Paris, is mile zero in the French mile road system. Think about that. It is the very center, not only of Paris but of France. Now, is it still the center of France? This is sort of the ongoing debate. Leave that aside for a minute. It is at the very center square, it's right there. Okay, so why is that significant? Because traditionally, before, and you got to go back before even anticipated masses, how most people worked was they were agrarian, so they're doing farm work, and at the end of the day, at the end of the week, you would bring your goods into the center square, and you'd have a market, and you're selling, right? So you're buying, you're selling, you're doing the things that you need to do to make a little bit extra money, to bring your produce to market, and that's all day Saturday. And then Saturday night, you're probably socializing, maybe have a pint in the local bar or the pub, you might go hang out with relatives, you might spend the night in the barn, maybe you get a house, maybe you're staying with relatives, whatever, and all of that then comes in the door Sunday morning. Did you see how that works? It's people have straw on them. There's some feathers, maybe a late night, maybe a little bit of a hangover, whatever. That's life, right? It's life. And all of life comes through those cathedral doors, and it celebrates the Eucharist before going back probably home. It may not be far, probably walking distance, to have a Sunday dinner, which is also a tradition that in my own family, I think it wasn't so long ago that families got together. Sunday was a particular day, kind of more of a formal meal that we would have, Sunday dinner together as a family. Different model. These are people, this is kind of transient. Yeah, there's locals. Maybe didn't get there every Sunday. There could be travelers, there could be pilgrims, could be different combinations. People didn't have pews, especially in Europe. Pews are more of the seats we sit in are more of a North American thing. They have them now in Europe, but it was mostly just an open space. And so you didn't necessarily, you probably stood close to the same place, but there's different combinations of people and different levels of faith and different motivations, and it's all kind of there, right? And the church has to make up its mind, like what is the dominant kind of model that we use, and I think in a way the church opted for the monastic. I think it was seen as the higher, the better, the more pure, and it probably is, but monastic model of liturgy and how we gather is indicative of monasteries. Most people, I think, have Sunday Mass here. It's like the 11 is a lot of kids and families and some new people and visitors and there are many things, but I don't know if I'd call it monastic. Like it's kind of who showed up and the level of liturgy that you can expect, the level of piety, the level of kind of common worship is a little bit limited by that, but nonetheless is very human. And I think I love it when there's lots of babies crying, not babies crying, but they're babies to cry, like, and families and walkers and cross pollination, different people and old friends connecting and all that kind of stuff. So it's all part of it. The problem is, I think we've been talking the last 25, 30 years about the new evangelization and the importance of opening up the front doors. And so we open up the doors, the concept's there, like we have to invite people, bring Christ to them, bring your friend to church kind of day, that kind of stuff. Okay, that's great. But if you have an open door cathedral style, but you put a monastic filter in there and expect people to come in who may not have been church, maybe it's been a generation, maybe they had a bad experience of church. There's all kinds of reasons that people don't come to faith. We don't know all of it. The secular world has grown a little bit assertive. There's been certainly lots of bad press out there, and some of it we earned, and some of it I think is sometimes a little bit prejudiced. But nonetheless, people have lots of reasons to have lots of different ideas about church and what it's supposed to be or what it was or their expectations, and to try to expect that everybody who walks through our door on any given Sunday is completely connected to the liturgy, is very much comfortable with what's going on, understands all the symbolism, kind of gets the rhythm of the whole thing, is a tall order. That's a lot to ask. And so I think if we're going to have a cathedral model, which I think is the one that we probably, it's like almost like I think a mass sometimes like being on a city bus, like it's a little bit of everything. Then how we celebrate and our expectations of celebration could maybe be in line with that. And what I'm saying here. So the balance of hymns, homilies, and hospitality, that we would be generous. If you saw someone at church that you didn't recognize, don't see them as competition for getting a better pew or closer or the last cookie at the social, but to see it as an opportunity to say, hi, how are you? Who are you? Are you new here? Did you, I noticed you have children with you. Are you going to the local school? Like the questions aren't so difficult that it's sometimes. I heard one of our priest fathers, Simon Lobo, we were traveling together when we were at the conference in London, and he called it the chicken line. He had a funny line about that. And he went by the chicken line was he had a faith conversation with somebody on the subway system. And it sounds like it's easy as a priest to talk about these things. Yeah, when I'm in a context of faith, when people come into the church and see me wearing a collar, especially if they know me or have seen me at Mass, yeah, it's easy to talk to them about faith. But when I'm out in the world, it's harder. Like you're just kind of riding the bus and someone's next to you and they say, what do you do? And I say, I'm a priest. And they say, oh. And there's a pause. And I could do a follow-up question, or I could say hello. I could ask them if they were Catholic. I mean, they could say no, and I'd rather not talk about it, and life goes on. Or they could say yes. And I've always had a question I wanted to ask. And it could lead to a deeper conversation or a God conversation sometimes. You see, that's more the cathedral kind of style, I think. If at least it needs to be the follow-up, the welcoming, the engaging kind of posture I think that we need to have. One thing I really truly hope to do in the fall is to start Alpha again and have Alpha courses in our parish. And the way you get people to Alpha is that people who've taken Alpha or people from the parish invite other people. Because you're all connected to people I'm not connected to. So you need to do the invite and I need to do the welcome. And that's the cathedral kind of model. Now, is it good that we have monasteries? Absolutely. And I hope there's a revival, I think, in people willing to pray and live that life, because I think that's the battery that runs the church. Something Bishop Scott had said to me years ago. But it's got to start somewhere. And the sense is that I'm not going to try to build a monastic life here for just a few people that are very, very, very committed in their faith. I'd like to make it a place where people could come and discover faith and be renewed by faith. And yes, of course, we want to be devout, and those who are devout would find here a touch of the Spirit and a movement of the Spirit. I think that is possible. I don't think that's just pie in the sky stuff. I think it is possible. But it takes a little bit of work, and it takes a bit of courage to cross that chicken line and have that conversation and make that invite. You're not responsible for people's reactions, but you are responsible for starting the conversation. Somebody has to ask the question. Somebody has to change kind of the formula or how things have been going or the way we've been doing things. And if not you, then who? If not me, then what other priest? If not now, then when? Like, when's going to be a perfect day to do that? Probably isn't one. But we can start now. So I've noticed what's happening lately. I don't know what's going on, but our restream is popping off. And so I'm going to try to get back on restream. I can't see you. I think I'm still streaming, so that's good news. But I can't see the questions, or I can't see any inputs or how many people are actually watching me right now. So I'm going to try to do this one more time, but I think I'll probably log off it there, because I think that's a good place to end it. And if you have a comment on that, please do leave it. If I don't see it tonight, I will try to look on Facebook later and see, okay, is there any comments? Is there anybody saying anything? Because I do appreciate your feedback, because it gives me, is this the kind of stuff you want me to talk about? Kind of like a thought of the week, like last week it was, again, sharpening our resentment in social media. This week it's more monastic versus cathedral. These are just thoughts that they're not too deep, but neither am I. But it's a new thought, maybe, or an original thought, or at least a stepping off place where we can start to kind of go a little bit further in our faith and come a little closer to what Christ might be asking of us. So hey, there it is. So God bless you all. It's a lovely night. Hope you get out for a walk if you haven't got a chance. We're just doing our holy hour now. I think Father Joshua is just starting. So I'm going to kind of catch him for maybe hear a few confessions and call it a night. May the good Lord watch over you. May the saints and angels intercede for you. May our Blessed Mother wrap you in the mantle of her peace. May God bless you and keep you now. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. My good people,